All right, so we're going to go ahead and start the session. Welcome, everyone, to Alloy's Foundry Fireside series. I'll be your host for today's session. Just to give you guys a little bit of background on the Foundry Fireside series, it's where spirit comes alive. These candid conversations bring together visionary entrepreneurs, curious minds, and trailblazing technologists to explore the raw, unfiltered realities of building something truly novel. This series exemplifies the very essence of Alloy, a forge of transparency, experimentation, and courage. Each session is a reflection of the messy, magical process of founding a startup where ideas collide, progress sparks, and innovation takes shape. For those of you unfamiliar with Alloy Growth Lab, we're more than an incubator. We're a launch pad for innovation, a catalyst for community, and a builder of bold ideas. This month, we're kicking things off as we dive into our second installment of the Foundry Fireside series, a signature gathering that sparks conversation. This month's session is going to be focused on MedTech innovation, and our guest, Devin Samuel, is the co-founder of Noxsano, a groundbreaking medical device company innovating in wound care through nitric oxide delivery. With a background in biomedical engineering and translational research, Devin has led Noxsano through challenging terrain of MedTech development, securing patents, managing regulatory pathways, and driving clinical strategy. He brings additional perspective from his time at Procter & Gamble, where he contributed to product innovation in a global corporate setting. As a proud member of the Alloy Growth Labs, Devin continues to push boundaries in the healthcare innovation space. We're excited to explore his journey and uncover insights that resonate with founders across all industries. Guiding our discussion this afternoon is Jeremiah. Is Jeremiah here? No, he is not. Okay. So I will go ahead and guide our session this afternoon. We're going to do a little shuffling of the deck chairs, and I'll go ahead and guide the conversation with Steven. And I'll go ahead and just, kick us off with Steven, and a few questions for you, Steven, just in terms of your background and the journey of Noxsano and building a MedTech company from concept to clinical use. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Kind of the background there of where you were and where you are today, and just kind of the seed around that and how that spawned to where you are today.
Yep, sure. First of all, Anthony, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm always happy to talk about our journey. So first and foremost, I'm a PhD chemist by training, and I worked very far upstream R&D at Procter & Gamble for a while. And it was there that I realized that I can fuel my passion to bring foundational science and apply that to real-world problems. Now, P&G is a huge consumer corporation, and I spent a lot of my time working in areas that I didn't really have passion for, right? But we were making changes. We were getting technology into products. So after a while, I thought to myself, is there a way for me to experience this in a different setting? I got into innovation consulting after I left P&G with a small boutique firm here in Cincinnati. And, we really helped Fortune 500 companies bring innovation in from the outside. And again, so I've always been at that sort of forefront of the marriage of technology and product, and how do you build a business around that? So Noxsano seemed like the next logical step, right? Can I practice what I preach and do this for myself? So in conjunction with my other co-founder, Alan Wiley, we crossed paths at P&G. We always had a lot of these really cool chemistries that P&G wouldn't touch because it was out of their market. And we could put them against real problems. And one of those things was the ability to generate nitric oxide. Nitric oxide has a very strong role in regulating all the downstream facets of wound healing. It's been known since the early 2000s. But the problem is that it's a very short-lived species. The challenge has always been, how do we deliver that product? There have been a number of commercial applications that have never really taken hold. And again, the problem was their delivery. That was the piece that we solved. We started in a garage in Oakley here in Cincinnati. And, very quickly, we realized that we were onto something. We had the ability to deliver an active that could potentially revolutionize the way that we treat wounds in this country, both acute and chronic wounds. So for us, the big challenge became, all right, we have a thing that works. How do you build a company around that, and how do you get that into a product? And again, feel free. I don't know what the direction is here, Anthony. If folks have questions, feel free to interrupt, or we can save them till the end. It's up to you. But I'm just gonna keep talking.
Mhm.
So very quickly, once we realized we had a product, we had an idea, we had a PowerPoint. We needed money. We were doing chemistry in a garage, and we needed delivery of chemicals to those to our sites, and they didn't deliver to residential addresses, so we needed a lab. We're formerly up at Rev One Ventures in Columbus. That drive got really tiring, so we moved down here to Alloy when you guys were still HCDC. Um, and then we were able to secure a wet lab facility here where we've done all of our R&D, all of our manufacturing. But the journey from garage to the first wet lab to this wet lab was not without its difficulties, right? Because one of the biggest challenges, I think, um, in any venture is getting other people to believe in your idea enough uh, to give you money to help fund that, right? And when we started this company, we had uh, we had an idea with a proof of concept and a PowerPoint slide. And that was enough, I think, for us to get going. Once we got enough capital in the bank, we were able to, broaden our operations to the point where we were able to take that first proof of concept device and build an actual MVP that we could take to market.
Yeah, no, that's thanks for sharing that, Steven. And Jeremiah, it looks like Jeremiah has jumped in. Jeremiah, you wanna jump in here now and drive some of the conversation? I'm happy to continue, but you are our chief stoker here. So if you want to keep going here with the fireside, it's all yours.
Okay. Hey, I'm Jeremiah Landy. I run a small engineering company. Some days have a lot of trouble running my Windows machine, but I'll let that one lie where it lies. So Stephen, kind of backing off on that, I know that you came down from Rev One. You were doing all the wet lab space and that stuff. Can we talk about how you kind of chose your journey for your company? Was that something that was very upfront? Because I know that you're doing wound care,
Mm-hmm.
particularly within animals now. So can you talk about how you ended up there, how that
Sure,
was the option?
sure. That's a great question. I think, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give to people looking to start their own venture is that you have to have passion for what you're doing, because you're going to face a lot of no's and a lot of doors are going to close in your face. And the only thing that gets you through that is your passion and commitment to bringing your idea to life. For us, when we knew we could develop short-lived species, nitric oxide was just one of three gasotransmitters that we could generate, hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide being the other two. These are all gases that your body utilizes as part of its natural biochemical processes, and they regulate different functions. Nitric oxide was the most attractive because the link between what it does in the body and its ability to regulate wound healing and turn on the healing machinery was well known, but the problem was always delivery. At the time when I left P&G, I worked with a technician. He was late 60s, outdoorsman, type 1 diabetic his whole life, managed his disease. He went outdoors one day, got a blister, and didn't come to work for a week and a half. We called him because it wasn't like that for him to not show up. And maybe he did have a flair for the dramatic, but he was actually at his podiatrist, and he said that they drew a line with red Sharpie around his ankle, and they said, if we don't see blood flow past this line, when your next visit, we're going to have to amputate. And at the time, I didn't know anything about a lot of the complications of diabetes. But this idea that something that starts off as innocuous as a blister could result in an amputation was eye-opening to me. And it told me that we really needed to have a different paradigm when it came to how we treated wounds. And that's why we decided to go after wound care. since I've started on this journey, I think we've met, hundreds of folks that are 1 degree of separation removed from a relative or a friend or a partner that is dealing with a chronic injury and for those on the call, a chronic wound is a wound that just stays open forever. Your body just cannot heal it. And it's a very difficult type of wound to treat. And the minute it gets infected, your chances of a positive outcome go down significantly. So my passion has always been to leverage foundational science and put that against a real world problem. Back at P&G, I was doing hair conditioning and hair straightening. I mean, yeah, a big problem for some people, but not something that really fueled that passion for me. So we got into wound care. We got into wound care because we wanted to make a real impact. In hindsight, we didn't think about what it's like entering into the medical space, a highly regulated space. What does it look like for a young company entering into a marketplace that is crowded, right? Because our goal was to just do it. And that's where we are right now.
So to kind of back up a little bit, we hear a couple different paths for startups, right? So you guys had a problem, you guys kind of surrounded by the problem. Can we talk about a little bit about how you approach the problem? So did you guys approach with market validation first, or did you approach with a solution and then try to find somebody to buy it?
So I think the way that our journey sort of transpired was that we had we had a series of hammers basically, right? And we looked at a host of applications from food preservation to hard surface cleaning, which it was not a space that we wanted to get into for obvious reasons. But the idea of bringing something to the market that can meaningfully impact the lives of the consumers, that was our guiding light. And when we started looking around, the first thing we did, and I think this is a little bit of the P&G training, the market size for wound care is large, right? We really
Yeah.
didn't have to dig too much into that. What we spent a lot of time trying to understand was what was our technical advantage here, right? Because one of the things that you're taught very quickly operating within CPG space is that you can have a great idea. If you can't build a picket fence around that, that idea is not going to bring the value to the company in the long run that you think it will. And for us, we had a technology that, to the best of our knowledge, no one else in the space had the ability to do. So the very first step for us, which I think is a little bit outside of what a typical startup is, especially when you're a few guys in a garage, is that we started patent work very early, right? We were able to divert a lot of our resources before we were even in a wet lab space to building that picket fence around our technology because we saw the promise and the value of what that technology could bring. So I think this is a little bit outside of the typical trajectory that a lot of companies might go through, right? Because especially when you're trying to raise money, because institutional money, they just care about when do I get 10x on my return, and what does your market size look like, so I can think about what that number is. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers your question. All of the market data, I think, has been something that as we got closer and closer towards getting into the marketplace, that's when those questions, we started spending a lot of time trying to answer those questions. Yeah.
I think you said it best. So to kind of disclose, I've had a couple of talks with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially public talks, and I think that at Startup Week last year, you did a good job of saying like, I think you called it like a Pac-tan startup, right? So I
Yeah.
think that to kind of emphasize a little bit from what I've known from you, and this is definitely putting words in your mouth. You guys focus on doing cheap and quick iterations up front to then work to discover your market and really drive in, which I think that is gold, right? The
Yeah.
the idea that you're spending as little money as you can to deliver the quality that you can as fast as you can for validation. I think that when I talk to you a lot, I think that's where a lot of the P&G, you keep mentioning comes in, is more of
Yeah.
like, how do we validate and kick this idea out
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask this question a little bit differently. So I know you wanted to change the world and I know you want to do stuff. Did you think that biased you in wanting success, right? So in those early days, did you find yourself tracking down sales or customers in ways that you probably shouldn't have? And then how did
Hmm.
you, because I know in the scientific community, it's a huge problem with, self-validation, right? You're eliminating things that make your study a success. But I guess in your guys' case, like when you were starting the company, how'd you prevent that from like leading you astray on your product? Like, so when you're doing
Yeah.
the discovery, like how'd you make sure that you kept that as virgin as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that was very apparent early on, and the company was founded by a bunch of PhDs, and I think that comes with pluses and minuses, right? I
Yep.
think some of the minuses were that we thinking about building the business was not something that we thought about very early on. Very early on, our mission was how can we iterate quickly to prove that this technology works and works reliably. And that might be a little bit of the academic training. The point I will make is that science is only right when you can't prove it wrong anymore. And that's why we spent a lot of time iterating with those early prototypes, just trying to break it, trying to find a way that we could not deliver a meaningful amount of nitric oxide and not get a positive response. So very early on, we spent a lot of money actually after the patents engaged with Ohio State's veterinary medical program, right? We did a lot of our preclinical work there on pigs. And that range finding was important as we thought about the device that we would take to market. But more importantly, it gave us an opportunity to demonstrate to ourselves that all of the back of the envelope calculations that we were doing in the lab actually produced the result that we're looking for in a living system. And uh, you know, it's again, there are a lot of things I don't think we really considered when we were entering into the medical space, because if you have a product that's direct to consumer in an unregulated space, it is very easy for you to iterate and get your end user to test that product so you can learn very quickly. I think when you're working in medtech, especially hard tech, right? Because of the regulatory hurdles that exist within our industry, it is very difficult to get that end use consumer feedback, right? So we did as much as we could with the preclinical work. Our big breakthrough, I think, came when um, we engaged with a hospital up in Columbus to do our first on human. We did a Now again, I don't know how familiar folks are, but the typical strategy is that you build a technology, you get it approved by the FDA, and uh, once it's available to the market, you just go to a hospital and say, hey, can I do a study with you guys? Or you can run a randomized clinical trial across multiple sites because it's a lot easier for them to bring your product into the hospital. Now, for us, we wanted to get to that data ahead of regulatory, right? Because regulatory was the behemoth that we would have to navigate at some point in the future. So we went through the investigational device route, right? With this hospital, we worked with their IRB to have a study that was approved as a research venture for the hospital to get these on patients. And, you know, a lot of times I think when you have an idea, people, again, depending on the strength of the team, they will assume that, yes, your idea works. What I really care about is can you turn that into a business? But I think the more analytical side of me, I wanted to see in vivo, in humans, that this did what we believed that it would do. And that's why I think we spent a lot of time getting to that first on human clinical. And it was really big validation for us, right? Because it demonstrated the technology worked.
Can we I have some other questions too that I think could lead a couple different pathways, but I
Yeah.
think to keep with the main theme right now, my question would be, can we walk through a little bit of the expected path to market you would go for medical, right? So I think when I've brought other medical devices in and talked to you, it's this path where you could engage with a doctor, you can get a
Mhm.
study. Like, can you talk about how that could be beneficial when getting a device to market or getting a solution to market. And then could you also tell a little bit about how you would go about that? So how did you engage Columbus? I'm
Yeah.
assuming you just didn't show up and throw
Yeah.
rocks at their window.
Yeah, yeah. We thought about, faking a medical emergency and then doing it in the ER.
Surprising that from an ER, yeah. Where's
Exactly.
your pigs at? We need to test this. So.
Exactly. No, I think that's that was one of our very early challenges. And I think uh once we demonstrated that the technology was working in the preclinical models, we began to think about, well, where does this fit into the existing wound care marketplace in human? And the challenge within wound care is that you're building a product to provide a positive patient outcome. Yes. So, the patient, that's the benefit to them. However, the hospitals and the physicians are the gatekeepers to that technology. Your value proposition to them is very different from the value proposition that you have to the people that you developed this product in mind with.
Yep.
And I think that once we had that realization, we began to think about, how do we engage with these gatekeepers, right? There are some physicians that respond to, I've had conversations with multiple docs where they're like, I have this one patient, I've been managing her wound for 3 years. I've thrown everything that's on the market at her. I would love the opportunity to have something that works, that actually works, right? And then you have other physicians who are like, your stuff seems great, but I don't get to say what comes into the hospital. You have to talk to procurement. And then procurement will have a very different value proposition, right? Like, how can you save our hospital money? Right? So it was for anyone bringing a product into healthcare, it's very easy. The guidance I would give is to not get sidetracked by your end user, right? Because again, we're doing these to improve the lives and outcomes of patients. But you also have to build that device and position it in such a way that there is a benefit that resonates with the actual gatekeepers of that technology. So to answer your question more explicitly, we started reaching out to a lot of procurement managers for hospitals. We spoke to a guy up at the Kettering system, and he loved our product. But the conversation, we had breakfast with him at like 7 a.m. somewhere up there. And I left that conversation realizing that we had a lot of work to do just around the economics of how we position our product in the market before we even demonstrated it worked in humans, right? And that thinking, if I could go back and tell my past self, I would have us focus on that a little bit more earlier in the process, because I would have had a lot less gray hairs. But in chatting with those procurement guys, one of them was like, if you want to bring a product into this hospital, you need to have a champion on the inside. And that's Dr. So-and-so, right? Like whatever he says to get, we just get, regardless of and that's kind of how we sort of spread feelers out into the hospital networks around our region. And again, you knock on a lot of doors until you find someone willing to engage with you and actually help champion your product internally.
I like what you said about having multiple customers and multiple stories. I think
Hmm.
that from my experience, a lot of people get lost in solving the problem, right? So they go too down
Yep.
the path of understanding like, oh, well, I have the best mousetrap, but at the same time, there's multiple tiers. And I don't
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people that take medical devices understand the procurement process as well. So how to present value to them. I know like luckily the health collaborative down here in Cincinnati did direct connect, so they give you direct
Hmm.
access to Cincy Children's. But I think to your point, a lot of medical devices also don't have champions that will drive them or speak. And I think that, and I don't know if you agree with that, having that driver, like you said, is critical. Somebody that could come out and give you the backing,
Yeah.
which in a lot of the medical device companies that we've done work for, I always hear the question, why is there this random doctor on their board? And I think to your point, it is very much like that random
Yeah.
doctor is adding credibility. Um,
100%.
Yeah, to ask a question slightly differently and to lead back too, did you find, so you come from an engineering background, very analytical. Did you find that inhibited you in this process? So dealing with, justifications for hospitals or cost benefit analysis, did you find either aggravation or like, can you walk through a little bit about how you had to evolve in that process?
Yeah, and I think this is that is the true journey of a startup, right? I think a lot of folks focus on the
Yeah.
trajectory of the company as it goes from an idea to a reality. But I think what's even more critical and the thing that's always lost is the growth of the founders in that process. Because to be an entrepreneur means to be in a situation where you don't have all the tools at your disposal to solve the problems that are in front of you. You have to come up with a way around those barriers or to learn new skills. And for me, my trajectory from P&G and then into innovation consulting, I think prepared me a little bit more because back at P&G, I was a true lab monkey, right? You're tucked away in a research facility somewhere. You might come outside for sunshine every couple
Yeah.
days. But then when got into innovation consulting, when you're bringing a technology in from the outside, you have to convince the stakeholders that not only is this technology important, but this is what it means for your business. And I think sitting at that interface between science, technology, and business requirements really prepared me a little bit more, I would say, for my trajectory with Noxsano, which is why, again, you always want to prove that the technology, you've built the best mousetrap. But I think sometimes the pitfall, one of the traps that a lot of folks fall into is that, they believe inherently if I build it, they will come, right? Like,
Yep.
no one ever wants someone to call their baby ugly, but that's why they focus so much on the problem. And they
Yeah.
think like, once I solve this problem, everyone will see how great it is. But you do have to realize, especially within the medical space, is that you have to know who your audience is and who's the person you need to convince to take that flyer on your technology. And whether that's the doctor that is looking for new solutions, or it's the guy from procurement who's looking to just reduce his hospital readmission rates for infections down by like 5 percentage points, right? Um, so I do think that sometimes the rigor of academia and its ability to laser focus in on a single problem is very beneficial when you're testing out your technology. But as you're thinking about actually building a business around that, you have to have the mental flexibility to learn new skills and understand the economics of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the also to go back to the evolution of the founders as well. So it's also how your solution would profit as well. So it's not only solving the problem, but when we talk about procurement, I remember I had a really good conversation with you probably like a month ago about non-traditional ways to work with hospitals. So we were talking about how instead of selling directly to occupational therapists outside the hospital, you can engage the hospital through studies potentially,
Mm-hmm.
and then they could sell the products
Mm-hmm.
in the hospital that then the patients take home. And so you're kind of creating this marketplace where, much like baby blankets or
Mm-hmm.
pacifiers, right? They're buying them in the hospital for their children, but then when they go home, they also will rely on that. And you kind of set up this stream outside. And so I think
Yeah.
to your point, as a founder, it's not only being flexible on your product and what you deliver, not too much, right? Because eventually
Yeah.
it's not your product, but the same way that you get to market.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk about your hardest lessons you've learned in the getting this thing used category? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So not building it, not going through it, but basically getting people to see it as a viable solution. And what was one big change you had to take in either pitching or evolution that
Yeah.
got you to where I need? Because I know you guys are still evolving and you're constantly
Yeah.
focused on quality.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I will be the first person to raise my hand and say that I was very much in the if you build it, they will come camp. right?
Yeah.
Simply because, you know, the pathway is there. You're like, here's a huge problem. It costs private and public payers a ton of money to manage folks that are readmitted from these chronic wounds. Here's a technology that's validated by science, and I have clinical data. What else is there to talk about? My biggest lesson was that yes, you can have a really great product that solves a big need, but that doesn't mean your technology is you can build a business around that technology. And you know, for me, when I look back on on my journey, I think understanding some of the metrics and you know, really just speaking the language that the decision makers, especially
Yep.
when you're looking for strategic investment, speaking that language are it's a huge benefit. The earlier you get proficient, the better those conversations will go. And you know, one of the things that I noticed, we had given a talk like a long time ago. We pitched to a strategic, and you know, we had 10 slides, and 7 of them were about science. It was our first time going in, and you know, our overarching thought was we have to show these guys how great the science is. When in reality, you know, the guy looked at the meeting invite. There are 3 people with PhD behind their names. He's like, all right, I guess their stuff works. Like, how can we make money from this? So, you know, 1 out of those 7 slides was important to him. And that was the one where the technology was patented. So not even, you know, he's not even getting into the nuts and bolts of how it works. And that's after that pitch, I realized, and of course, you know, we just stayed in touch with them. We weren't successful there, but the hard lesson there was that, you know, we needed to make sure that we gave more time, especially as we got further along in the process, to addressing all of the challenges that are required to build a successful business outside of making sure that you develop an MVP that is as close to your go-to-market as possible.
I think to kind of hark back on a couple things you're saying, I think that a lot of people don't spend enough time discovering the voice of the customer or the voice of the potential, end user. So I think
Yes.
to your point, you build a solution, and I feel a lot of startups will just bring that with them. They will just say, to your point, like,
Yeah.
look, here's a working thingamajig, give
Yep.
me money because it works.
Yeah.
But to your point, they don't always realize that that's not the language they speak. Like,
Yep.
money is its own language, and that.
Yep. One of the and I will say, you know, the biggest lesson that I have learned was from the pandemic, because at the time, you know, we were preparing to go through the regulatory process on our MVP, which we'd been working on for 4 years at this time. Um, and you know, that was the next big hurdle, right? You get through the FDA, then you're all about how do I sell and scale and grow a business, right? All the product development stuff is behind you. The pandemic hit, and you know, apart from you know the negative side of the pandemic itself on the population,
Yeah.
the additional negative for us was that the FDA was not looking at any technology that was not a COVID therapeutic. If you didn't have COVID therapeutic in your title at that 2020, 2021, they're not looking at you. And very quickly, we realized that if this company was going to survive, we needed a way to generate revenue ahead of gaining regulatory approval. And that was a very big paradigm shift for us, because when you think about it, you've been pushing a boulder up a hill for 4
Yep.
years, right? And you're at this crossroad where, you know, you still have to push that boulder up the hill, but here's a second boulder that you need in order to make sure you get that
Yeah.
first boulder where it needs to go. So for us, when we looked around, we explored getting into maybe a more non-regulated space like food preservation. But that, you know, I think I personally didn't have any passion for that. So then the idea became, maybe we can launch this in a similar market where we face similar challenges, and essentially use that as a test market before our launch into the human side. And if we can generate some revenue along the way, that'd be great. And that's how we ended up. That's where Noxsano Animal Health was born. Back in 2021, we thought, well, veterinarians are also facing the same challenges that human physicians are,
Yep.
except, their patient compliance might actually be better, some people would say. But the idea
Yeah.
that animals suffer from these really traumatic wounds that become infected, that stay open forever, that can result in euthanasia, and there's a limited amount of technology that they can apply to it. It became a space that we entered. Now, the FDA has oversight over the veterinary medical space, but there is not the regulatory hurdle analogous regulatory hurdle like on the human side to get selling into the marketplace. And I think that is where a lot of uh, some of our most important lessons with respect to launching a product into a space has come. And I look back on that and I think, if the pandemic never happened, we may have gone through the FDA just fine. But then I would still have to now learn this lesson around how do we launch a new product into a crowded marketplace? How do we interact with distributors? How do we position our product for the key stakeholders within these organizations? All of these things, our test market in vet allowed us to learn. And then, we were also generating revenue, right? So we were able to keep the lights on during the pandemic. That was a really big pivot. And I think it's something that, in hindsight, I do think it put us in a lot better position today than we would have been otherwise. But hindsight is 50-50.
Well, also to get back to that too, I think that a lot of startups refuse to pivot out of fear that they might not come back to their original idea. So when you guys were talking about pivoting, did you guys ever have discussions about what it would look like to transition back? Did you have any fears with, hey, if we do this pivot, we might just be niched or like we might limit our ways? Like what was some of the discussions that went through into that? And then how did you gauge the market size, right? So when you
Yeah.
guys looked at it, you guys talk about all these humans and about doing all this human trial and human doctors. Like, what was some of the thinking behind it, and what was some of the pivots on the sales? Like, did you
Yeah.
have to rework a lot of the customer vision? Did you say, hey, let's just find a vet that thinks like a doc? Like, what was some of this like behind the scenes thought process?
Yeah, I think the veterinary space was and it still is one of the best test markets, right? I think physicians in that practitioners in that space are very used to repurposing technologies that come from human medicine into the vet space. We are a technology that was built with a human application in mind, but we entered into that space as a cutting edge technology for veterinary practitioners to solve one of their biggest challenges. And in terms of learning, I think a lot of the challenges we face getting that product into market and the vet side are also going to be the same challenges we face on the human side. But within the vet space, in a veterinary clinic, the margins are razor thin, razor thin. And I think they're even thinner than they are on the human side. So this was really probably one of the most difficult markets for us to get into, even though the regulatory barrier was significantly lower. We had to do a lot of learning very quickly. The way that we thought about the end user also had to change, right? Because typically, medical device sales on the human side, that is a whole industry in and of itself, right? There's a lot of networking that has to happen. A friend of mine who is a rep, he always says that when you're a rep, your whole job is to get from the carpet to the tile, meaning that, I
Yeah.
tried, right? I tried just walking into clinics to talk to folks, and you never get past reception into the back where the docs are. So a lot of that was relationship building. And when we launched into vet, we had very similar challenges, right? One of our biggest challenges very early on was that people just did not know about our technology or our company. I've never heard of you before. I've never seen an ad for you before. And then, these are all things where we walk in with this clinical data that shows that we're able to heal wounds in half the time that a healthy animal can heal itself, thinking, look at that. You can get your patients in and out in half the time. That means you can treat twice as many patients with your current bandwidth. They're like, yep, that sounds great. That value proposition resonates with me, but I have no idea who you are. so I'm not going to buy your product. And that's when we started thinking, okay, well, how do we now address this challenge, right? Everything is outside of our product's actual ability to solve the healing problem. How do we then create a company in this animal health space? And, we started going to trade shows, right? Our very first trade show, we built our website. We said we're gonna take orders there. We had a little square reader, like we're a taco food truck, and
For wounds, a
for
wound
wounds,
truck.
exactly. And people would come by and they were very interested because here is a new company at a trade show that they understand. And this is all like immediately post-pandemic, by the way. So like people were coming back. They were like 2 years out from getting to travel for free on the company dime. And then they said, okay, well, who are your distributors? And I said, well, we have a website. And I pulled out our iPads, like, I can take your card right now. And they're like, that's not how clinics work, right? If you don't come through the door from our distributor, I'm not gonna purchase from you. So again, these are the hard knock lessons that we had to learn that I think, someone with perhaps more experience in business development and running companies in that space very early on would have understood that this veterinary space does not operate as a direct-to-consumer model. It's a distribution model. And oh, by the way, here are the distributors you need. So from that first trade show, it took us about 10 months to get on shelf with the top 4 veterinary distributors in the country. And one of those distributors took the entire 10 months. Like we talked to them first and they were the last to sign. And again, they were doing their due diligence. They were watching sales through some of their competitors or having their reps talk to clinics and soft pitching the idea before they committed. So all these things are lessons that we learned, and it really does shape the way that I think about a product launch in the human side once we get approval over there, because it's going to be very different, right? It's going to be very different to a direct-to-consumer product that you just, you build on your own and you have the ability to sell.
I think to take this in a slightly different direction as
Mhm.
well, can you talk a little bit about things outside of the solution you developed? So I know when I've talked to you before, it's about delivery, so
Mhm.
like, was there different packaging between the two? I know you said there's a different website, so I'm assuming your pamphlets had to change. Like
Yeah.
a lot of things had to change to align with
Yeah.
what they expected, which I'm assuming is easier for them to intake because it's more of a known and less
Mhm.
overwhelming. But can you talk about like packaging and kind of like when you were dealing with distributors, did it change like your internal SKU numbers? Like how'd you go about accommodating this
Yeah.
pivot from a logistics side?
Yeah, everything had to change. We had to separate everything. One of the biggest challenges, I mean, you can form a C corp pretty easily for not a lot of money. But when you think about like, well, now I have to have a logo, I have to protect that. And now I have to have packaging that there is a set of rules for packaging that you have to follow as long as you're in any sort of healthcare space. On the veterinary side, the rules are a little bit lax, but our intention was to design the packaging to be compliant with the human side. So that way, when we did launch, we already had experience in what that would look like. So we over labeled our products. Like vets are used to using stuff that's like Dr. Johnson's magic salve or something that comes in like a little tub. But here are our products coming, looking like real medical products, right? So for us, again, it was an opportunity for us to learn to do that kind of packaging. The big challenge with the distributors was first off, like no distributor liked the fact that we were on shelf with competitors. The end.
Yeah.
The hardest part was the contract negotiations to say, well, hey, we already have a distribution agreement in place with you guys, with your competitors, but your clinics that you serve are asking us to get you on board so that they can purchase through their regular channels. I'll give you an example. We had a vet out in Sacramento. She was part of VCA Sacramento, which is Mars Veterinary. They own like 2,000 clinics across the country. She said, I love your product, but I have to purchase it through your website on my personal card because you're not carried by our only distributor. And she said, I have other physicians in here that want to use this, but I can't do anything until you get on shelf with them. And, things like that, when you're thinking about like, all right, this is the R&D we have to do this week, and then you get that email and you realize like this is a barrier to sales that brings in revenue that will continue to keep us working funded and working on new products, you have to address this, right? And, I don't have the business development partner to kick it to. I am the one that has to now go wade through these things. So, at the time, we did have one guy who was temporarily with the company who was very good at, he had a lot of relationships within the veterinary space. And he was critical in getting to those stakeholders, the procurement guys now on the veterinary side, and saying, hey, this is what you need to do to bring this product in. And they will say, well, this is a SKU count that we need. This is the labeling that we need. Here's how it's going to be tracked. And oh, by the way, we're going to give you a haircut on that price because who else are you going to go to, right?
Yeah.
So I think the learnings we had in the vet space, I think will continue to hopefully help us avoid a lot of pitfalls when we get into human. But just understanding how people who do not care about your technology and its ability to change the single thing that it's designed to do, understanding all the things that are important to them in order for them to take your technology on and move it to other folks. That is very critical. That is the biggest piece of advice I would give because, when you think about it, when you talk to a distributor, they are quote unquote your end user, right? Because you have to convince them that, I need to potentially jeopardize my relationship with all these clinics that buy other stuff from me for this new product because you say it's good, right? How do you have that conversation and get them on your side? So the commonality here is that as a startup business owner, you are always pitching. You are pitching yourself, you're pitching your company either for money, you are pitching distributors to work with you so you can get money. You're always pitching. Every interaction that you have with folks in the space, you have to be clear on what your value proposition is to them.
Yeah, I would also clarify, the longer I've done it, you also have to be very clear on what you want from them as well, right? So I think it's that reverse interaction, because I think a lot of startups start out just trying to make any type of money, but what ends up happening is you just go too broad. So I'm sure there was times that you did the um no. So sorry, somebody was, as with all life, stopping in to ask for another startup. No, so I think the critical piece though is that if you don't ask them the right thing, so you were talking about purchasing and where to
Yeah.
go, then it could very well be that you're not drawing in the right questions or customers, and therefore, you're not selling right. Okay, and I think I know I was late, but I also think we've worn out our welcome. Well, at least I have. So what, Anthony, do you want to field some questions?
Yeah, no, you're good. Let's take a little breather here and just kind of check the audience, see if there's any questions out there. If you want to just go ahead and come off of mute, I mean, feel free to go ahead and do so. If you've got a question you want to jump in with. We
We
also
should have
have one in the
planted some questions that made us look good. So
we also have one in the we do have a question in the chat from Amy. And I will try and read this.
Sure.
And Amy, if you want to jump in just with some clarification here, but she said, "Hello, Steven. Your company and products sound fantastic. Can you
Yep.
share more particulars about how the nitrous dioxide (NO2) is stabilized or packaged for delivery?" So that's the first part. Also, who are your target customers who will purchase the product, and can this product still be purchased for iatrogenic wounds?
Hi.
Whoa.
So a couple different parts, and there's Amy. There you
Hi,
go.
I'm sorry. I know you answered some of this, and I apparently dropped the two in there. But I guess the iatrogenic wounds part, I was thinking more of the hospitals and how they don't get reimbursement if like
Mm-hmm.
pressure ulcer is
Mm-hmm.
from them.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess entering into the vet space, do you
Yeah.
think that's made it so that your product is cheaper and easier to purchase? And
Yeah. So that's a great question. We came in at a price point that we believed the veterinary end users would stomach, right? And for us, because we have the ability to do all of our manufacturing internally, our margins are very good, right? So we had a little bit of latitude there. The other thing is that because the margins in the veterinary clinic are so thin, products that come in, like if you purchase if you purchase a dressing from your vet to take home for your dog, it is at baseline marked up 100%. 100%. And it was not until we were operating, at least for about a year in this space, that we began to do some of the post-market intelligence to learn, like, what are people actually paying for our products? And it was really mind-boggling. But our goal was to make sure that we could get to a price point that practitioners felt comfortable with being able to mark up, and then that we still had the ability to make margins, even with the distributors coming in and giving us a haircut. To answer your question specific to the human side of things, you know, and I think Jeremiah kind of touched on this. Like our goal almost felt like we made a silver bullet solution to a number of different types of wounds. And in the human side, the wounds that you see in every different care setting are all different, but our technology can actually treat all of them. Now, the challenge for us is that a wound in an acute setting has a different set of parameters that are important to that practitioner versus a pressure ulcer in a long-term care facility. And then the crazy part is that reimbursement now is different in each one of these care settings, right? So for us, we made a product that fit under an existing reimbursement code. And that was part of our drive to get to this price point that would satisfy market entry and still give us the ability to generate revenue. And then the last thing about how is it stabilized? So nitric oxide is a short-lived gas. Its half-life is 15 milliseconds. Our core technology is that we take precursors to nitric oxide, and then at point of use, we're able to actively generate nitric oxide from these precursors by using a small electrochemical cell. And it really is very simple. Physicians just add water, it turns on the electrochemistry, and we generate an aqueous suspension of nitric oxide that goes directly to the wound bed. So it solves two challenges. One, the ability for the nitric oxide to get to where it needs to go. So that's generating it in the wound. And then two, because it's an aqueous suspension, the half-life is significantly longer. So it sticks around long enough for the body to actually take it up and kick off all those downstream processes that lead to eventually the reepithelialization of the wound.
that's really cool. Have you looked at doing this for like mucous membranes or anything?
We have not. One of the challenges that we've had is that, we have so many applications and then again, smaller niche applications into where nitric oxide is used because it's just used extensively throughout mammalian biology. That sometimes we've had to like rein in the Friday afternoon R&D sessions to say, hey, like what are the next 3 product extensions going to look like within wound care? But I'm always happy to connect. I'd love to flesh out the mucous membranes angle a little bit more. And I guess depending on your background, if you do have a desire to chat, I'm always looking to learn more from folks on the medical side of things to understand how we can tailor our technology to their needs.
Yes, please. Yeah, I do have a medical background. I was an RN for 7 years.
Oh, I
Not
definitely want to talk to
practicing. I
you.
still have it, and I'm a software engineer now.
Oh, yeah.
For a few
Oh,
years. So
yeah, we should definitely connect because I think we
okay.
have a few things in the pipeline that would benefit from your unique sort of intersection of skills.
I would love that. I'll I was gonna say I can connect on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Great to meet you.
All right. Thank you for the question, Amy. Final call for questions before we let everyone go here. Feel free to jump in. If not, we'll close it out. See any.
Yep.
But yeah, we'll go ahead. We're up against time here. I want to be respectful of everyone that's on the call today. Again, thanks for coming out. Appreciate your time. Steven, thank you for your story and sharing your story. Thanks so much for that. Jeremiah, thanks for the moderation and Q&A. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. And stay tuned for our next Foundry Fireside. It's coming up June 26th. So get more details about that via LinkedIn and other registration portals that we use. So just stay tuned for that. Again, coming June 26th is when that next Foundry Fireside will be. But and this will be recorded. So if anyone wants to take a second look at this one, we're going to post that recording to our Alloy Development YouTube channel. So just stay tuned for that as well. But yeah, again, thanks everyone. Again, Anthony Seppi of the Alloy Growth Lab. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, thank you.
Yep, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.